These videos have been possible with the help of those that support me on Patreon, so thank you guys for your constant support, and if you want to support me, you can click on the link on your screen right now, or click the link in the description below. Thanks a lot. Hello everybody, my name is Tyler Valle, and yeah, it's been a while, but welcome to the third and final episode of The Sins of Our Publishers, at least in the main series. I may do one-offs here and there in the future, and I think I already have one planned if I don't add it to this episode. If you're unfamiliar to what this series is, The Sins of Our Publishers is a series where I take a look at the long list of wrongs I see coming from major publishers in gaming. In the last episode, I covered Sony, Square Enix, Microsoft, Namco Bandai, and Koei Tecmo. And like before, I asked you to help me out if I missed anything you think should be added to this list, and to leave me a comment or tweet me out your answers. And that's exactly what you guys did, so before I begin with today's episode, let's once again discuss what I missed, left out, or what I think needs to be updated. First up is Sony, of whom I've been accused of being a softball-tossing fanboy for not mentioning the fact that Sony executives will lie about the strength of their consoles. This was somewhat intentional, however, because all console manufacturers will lie about the strength of their hardware. How much do you think these things would actually sell if they were to tell you how strong they actually are? And while this is definitely a sin, I don't really consider it fanboyism to think that Sony doesn't do it worse than anyone else. And if you think I'm a fanboy for thinking that Sony doesn't do it worse than anyone else, I only have one thing to say to you.
Sony always wins. Always wins. You can't beat Sony. Come on. Sony always wins. Always wins. Have you seen the PS3? Nice. Chadwood, what's his ass? With $600. $600 ain't shit. I'll give you $600 just to shut the hell up. $600 ain't shit.
I'm sorry, I couldn't resist a chance to play that song. Honestly, it was something I was considering coming back to at a later date, but it looks like I have no reason to anymore. One thing I did forget to mention was that Sony dropped the ball on The Last Guardian. The game was originally announced in 2009 after being in development since 2007 and was slated for a 2011 release on the PlayStation 3. The game was being developed by Team Ico, the guys behind Shadow of Colossus and Ico, and was to be designed and developed by Fumito Ueda. Unfortunately, the game was hit by massive delays and eventually would go quiet in 2011 after Fumito Ueda suddenly left Team Ico, but promised to stay on as an advisor to the title. After 2011 came and went, the game's development went completely silent, with Sony only saying, "It won't be at E3 this year, but we are still working on it." This went on from 2009 all the way up to this year's E3, with Sony opening their conference with gameplay footage of the game and announced that the game will now be coming out on the PlayStation 4 and announced a release date. Much like another title I talked about in the last episode, The Last Guardian was originally announced as a game that was to be pushing console sales, much like Final Fantasy 15. Now they'd have to buy a PlayStation 4 to experience it, even if people bought a PlayStation 3 the first time. It should also be mentioned that while Sony and Team Ico claim that the out-of-date hardware of the PlayStation 3 led to the delays in the eventual move to PlayStation 4, Fumito Ueda told Game Informer that the choice was completely made by Sony executives, and it was an unnecessary one. Sony just wanted more money. And I don't know about you, but if I had to choose between believing Sony executives and the former lead developer on the game, I'm gonna go with the developer. When it comes to Square Enix, I want to correct a mistake and clarify on a point that I made. I made a mistake when I said that the Hitman series was developed by Eidos, a company of whom I will continue to mispronounce the name of. The real developers of Hitman were IO Interactive. That was an amateur mistake and I apologize. The second is a clarification that I want to make about Final Fantasy 15. Someone in the comments mentioned that the PS3 couldn't handle the current build of Final Fantasy 15, which is true. I mean, hell, the PlayStation 4 can barely handle it. The point is that Final Fantasy 15 went through tons of revisions to get to the point it's at today. The build we see now is not the build that they had when they announced the game originally. Final Fantasy Versus 13 was supposed to be a console seller, but was moved to the next generation instead, and to me, that's a big issue. Oh, and you remember when I said Koei Tecmo were terrible with PC ports? Oh, and the online for Dead or Alive 5 has been delayed again and again and again, and it still isn't out. However, I do want to mention one thing. When you look at the sale of all PC ports of Koei Tecmo games, you'll notice that the games that are PlayStation 4 ports don't seem to sell as well as the PS3 ports. This is probably what leads to them choosing the PS3 ports over the PS4 ports. And finally, to all the folks that had to let me know that they never got the Red Ring of Death, I think I got a picture that perfectly sums up my feelings to you all. And with all of that out of the way, we can finally begin today's episode, and boy, it's going to be a long one. Today I'm covering 3 companies, 2 of whom I see as the worst of the worst, at least in Japan, and one who will be replacing Sega on the list. Seeing as Sega recently announced 2 new Yakuza games, I'm hoping by me saying that Sega is a good boy who didn't do nothing, they'll reward me with a Western release of both games. Once again, if I miss anything, like always, call me names and leave comments in the comment section. Let's begin. First up is Warner Brothers, the only Western publisher in today's episode. Warner Brothers has been in the news more recently, and for good reason. Let's start from the bottom and move all the way to the big one. Let's start with Batman Arkham Origins. When Origins was released, it was a broken mess that had a multiplayer component that didn't even work properly. And it was made even worse when it came to light that the developers were only going to patch a series of progress blocking bugs that made it impossible to actually beat the game. This meant that a lot of other bugs were just going to get ignored. In a forum post, a community manager named Mercury stated, "Hi all, the team is currently working hard on the upcoming story DLC and there are currently no plans for releasing another patch to address the issues that have been reported on the forums. If we do move forward with creating a new patch, it will try to address the progression blocking bugs for players, not the minor glitches that do not prevent one from continuing to play. The issues that are not progression blockers will unfortunately no longer be addressed. We apologize for any inconvenience that this has caused for some of you and want to thank you for being patient." This meant that instead of actually patching a broken game that Warner Brothers pushed out the door to reach a Christmas market, they were instead trying to push out DLC so they can make more money. This wasn't even the first time that the Arkham series was struck in the middle of a DLC controversy either. Batman Arkham City also faced backlash when it came out that large parts of the game where you play as Catwoman were pre-order DLC, along with pre-order costumes that were linked to specific retailers. You know, everyone's favorite. Unfortunately, the latest Arkham game wasn't able to avoid that controversy either. In fact, I think it may actually be the worst one so far. Batman Arkham Knight didn't really get off on the right foot when it announced that it would have a $40 season pass. So that's pretty bad, but you know what's worse? Batman Arkham Knight was pulled from Steam on June 24th and only recently was re-added back to the market. The game was pulled due to the game being practically unplayable due to, yeah, you guessed it, a slew of bugs upon release. But the most pathetic issue that affected this title was the fact that it was locked at 30 FPS. Seriously? I mean, I get it for consoles because they're all outdated hardware anyway, but on the PC? Now there are ways to fix the lock by editing the INI file, but the fact still stands. In the year 2015, no PC port should be locked at 30 FPS. I mean, really, what are you doing? Who do you think you are, Koei Tecmo? This controversy was made even worse by the fact that according to two QA testers who wished to remain anonymous, Warner Brothers knew that the PC version was a broken mess, but pushed it out the door anyway. In fact, there were many sites reporting that the PC version made available for purchase was an outdated, broken build of the game. How awful do you have to be when it comes to releasing your games in a working fashion to release an outdated build? While I'm not sure if these reports are true or not, the one thing that I know is true is that the Warner Brothers knowingly limited the frames to 30 and attempted to lie about it. When an NVIDIA physics video came out for Arkham Knight, the gameplay was at 30 FPS, but they sped it up to 60, and you can tell by hearing the thugs yelling because their voices are a higher pitch. I mean, if that doesn't scream pathetic, I don't know what does. However, Batman isn't the only series that Warner Brothers has a bit of trouble releasing on PC without problems. And if you want a clear example, look at every PC port by NetherRealm Studios. Warning, in this part of the video, I'd like to actually take a minute to issue a trigger warning. I'm about to spend several minutes talking about one of the most incompetent developers I can think of. If for any reason you are filled with an unquenchable bloodlust, I nor Gamesnosh.com are responsible for any damages done to you or any property. If the condition lasts for more than 5 hours, we'd like to recommend that you sit back, relax, try to enjoy a good video game, or catch up on your anime backlog. You have been warned. I'm gonna say 2 words, and I want you to shout out the first word that comes to mind, okay? Okay. High voltage. What was the first word you thought of? For me, it was terrible. High Voltage, if you didn't know, are the developers behind some fantastic titles such as The Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy or Toy Story Mania. But more recently, you may know them as the guys that port all of NetherRealm Studios games to PC. They ported Mortal Kombat 9, Injustice Gods Among Us, and Mortal Kombat X. All 3 ports, by the way, had terrible netcode, and the only one that seemed to be getting any work is Mortal Kombat X. But that was only after High Voltage were quietly replaced, or at least been reported that they were. My main question here is though, how did High Voltage keep getting work? My theory is that they were able to slide under the radar solely because their ports came out nearly a year to 2 years later. For example, Mortal Kombat 9 originally came out in April 2011, and the PC port came out in July of 2013. Therefore, its issues were able to slide straight under the radar and no one really noticed. Now for Injustice, it wasn't that long of a wait. Injustice came out in April 2013 on the Xbox 360, PS3, and the Wii U, and the Ultimate Edition came out in the PS3, PS4, Vita, 360, and PC in November of the same year. which honestly is another sin. Re-releasing a game's definitive edition only 7 months later, but that's not as bad as this can get. Hey, go away. We'll talk about you later. Go, wait your turn. Sorry about that. Anyway, so High Voltage has poorly ported several of NetherRealm Studios' fighting games to PC, but Mortal Kombat X is the only one that was released alongside the console version, meaning more people were able to see the train wreck that is High Voltage ports. This actually became so bad that High Voltage had to release a 16 gig patch that deleted everyone's progress, then had to release a second 16 gig patch in the same day to remove the first one. Lastly, there are those PS3 and Xbox 360 versions of Mortal Kombat X which recently just got cancelled, so fuck you who don't own a PC or current gen system. Good job, Warner Brothers. You have truly shown just how much you really care about the consumer for sure. Second up is Capcom, and honestly, I don't even really know where to begin here. Capcom and publisher sins go hand in hand, and it's been going on for so long that it's pretty much common knowledge at this point that Capcom are one of the most anti-consumer publishers out there. In fact, their list of sins are so long that I'm most likely gonna miss a ton of them, so make sure you keep your eyes and ears open going forward and tell me anything that I've missed. So let's get the big one out of the way first. Capcom are the ones that made on-disc DLC a normality by taking games, chopping them up, putting chunks of them behind a paywall for you to unlock, even if you already had them on the disc. Which is why when you get a pre-order code or something nowadays, most of the time that quote-unquote download is only about 354 kilobytes, because you're unlocking something that's already there. While this was going on for a few years and it was nothing more than an annoyance, it really came to head with the release of Street Fighter Cross Tekken, which released with 12 characters on the disc, but hidden behind a paywall of $20 down the line. This was coupled with a horrible gem system that you could either grind to unlock or pay to unlock them, even though the gems were all on the disc anyway. Capcom tried to defend this decision by saying that the character data on the disc was just a placeholder while they worked to finish them and would allow people who didn't own the characters to fight against or spectate in matches where people did own the characters. Now, while this may have some truth to the claim looking back at Street Fighter 4, where you would have to download costume catalogs to be able to see costumes of characters that you didn't own, this wasn't the only reason this happened. Capcom could have easily finished these 12 characters and had them on the disc, even if it meant that the game was delayed by several months to do it. Why? Because Capcom were both the developers and the publishers of this title. The ball was in their court, and instead of doing anything about it, they fumbled hard. And even though they may have lost some money initially if they would have delayed it, this resulted in the game being dead at the starting line, meaning we would have to sit through another few years of Street Fighter 4, and would also lead to the delay and the possible cancellation of Tekken Cross Street Fighter, the Bandai Namco sister title. While their history of on-disc DLC may be the worst sin objectively, I think many fans would agree that the sin that hurts the most is what Capcom has done to Mega Man. Mega Man is one of the most iconic video game characters ever made. Even most people who have no idea what game he comes from would recognize him. He has had a long history of great titles across a multitude of different platforms. Unfortunately, his future has been looking pretty bleak in the last few years. There have been no new mainline Mega Man games announced. Instead, fans of the series would have to deal with re-releases of the older games on every platform they can think of. In fact, Capcom went out of their way in certain places to outright mock fans of the series, such as adding classic box art Mega Man to Street Fighter Cross Tekken. To be a Mega Man fan at this point was to be a masochist. But what really pissed off the internet, what really showed just how much contempt Capcom held for their audience, was the cancellation of Mega Man Legends 3, which Capcom Europe would later go on to blame the fans for not being interested enough in. Now that post was deleted after the internet caught fire, but never forget who this company is. With Mega Man in ruins and fans of the series praying on their hands and knees for a new game to be released, this led to an opportunistic vulture to sweep in and promise them the world. This piss ant Kenji Inafune came in announcing a Kickstarter for a spiritual successor to Mega Man called Mighty No. 9. Mega Man fans who at this point were trying to choose between donating to this Kickstarter and committing seppuku decided to hold off on their ritual suicide and throw money at Mighty No. 9, hoping they'd be able to fill that hole that Capcom tore out of them, which led to the game raising $3.3 million. This was well over its initial goal, so how did it turn out? Well, just about everything that could go wrong did go wrong. The game, which was due out later this year after 2 delays, was once again delayed into 2016, but to make up for that delay, Concept announced that they'll be releasing a demo to all the backers. Unfortunately, that was also delayed, replaced by some kind of weird Mighty Number 9 rap, which I'll have a link in the description below for you to check out yourself. So let's consider this for a moment. If your game can't even be released by the second deadline you set, and you can't even release a demo for that game on time, should you, as a company, come back to Kickstarter with yet another campaign, this time for a game called Red Ash, which is just Mega Man Legends reskinned? No, you probably shouldn't do that, but that's exactly what they did, and as it turns out, fans wisened up and the campaign failed. Not that it mattered though, because an obscure Chinese company approached Concept about Red Ash, and now the game's gonna get funded anyway. I bring all this up for 2 reasons. Because of Capcom's execution-style murder of the Mega Man series, they led the way for a con man to come in and prey on desperate fans of Mega Man and take their money. Not only that, he's been allowed to do it twice, with the second attempt creating for us a real Chinese knockoff of Mega Man. Inifune's heartless ability to prey on the vulnerable isn't the only reason why I'm bringing him up, however. He actually also fits into the next sin. Capcom lowered the quality of many of their IPs after Kenji Inafune told them that they needed to westernize them for Western appeal. So let's go with the obvious big example, DMC Devil May Cry by Ninja Theory, a game that should never have been made and would never have been made if the publisher gave a shit about their fans. Am I saying that I didn't like DMC? No, actually I thought it was really fun, and I owned 2 copies of it, used. But even though I liked DMC, I could fully understand where people were coming from when they said they hated this new game. And the person you can blame for this idea was Inafune. Even though he hadn't been at Capcom for years, his ideas still stuck around, which made them want to westernize many of their IPs. Resident Evil went from a horror game up into a really boring western action game, Lost Planet 3 lost all of the charm of the first 2 games, Bionic Commando, I don't even know what happened to that series at this point. In fact, I can only think of one company that actually took over, one western company that took over a Japanese IP and did it justice. And that was the teams behind Dead Rising 2 and 3. So other than that, can you really name one? Even though Devil May Cry 4 was the best selling in the series, DMC bombed hard, which led to the whole thing being shelved up until last year when Capcom announced the Devil May Cry 4 Special Edition, which to be honest is really good, even if you are able to unlock everything. My only hope is that the Special Edition having good sales numbers, even though it was digital only in the West for no reason, we will eventually see a true Devil May Cry 5 sometime down the line. While I may have talked about on-disc DLC earlier, and I also touched upon releasing a game's definitive edition within a year of the game's initial release, what kind of monster would do both to the same game? Well, the answer to that, dear viewer, is Capcom with Marvel vs. Capcom 3, which had Jill Valentine and Shuma Gorath as on-disc DLC characters that you had to buy separately, individually, and who unfortunately due to expired license agreements you can no longer buy, but that's okay because the game's dead anyway. But they also announced and released Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3 9 months later. This was a game that was pretty much just a patch, released separately and unable to be upgraded to. That meant that people who in February of that year bought Marvel vs. Capcom 3, their game was out of date in November of the same year. You couldn't play with people who owned Ultimate Marvel. You could only play with people who owned Marvel. That is ridiculous. Not even Street Fighter has that problem. Only Capcom would be so brazen as to outright tell their fans, haha, go fuck yourselves in such a way. But since then, another company has followed in their footsteps, but to a much lesser extent. The bottom line here is that Capcom is a company that you should only support very sparingly. And if you're able to, buy their games secondhand to ensure that they don't get your money. And while Capcom as of late has been making some very good business decisions, it has less to do with respecting you as a consumer and more to do with the fact that they were on death's door only a few months ago. And finally, the big one, the recent one, the one that everyone's been talking about, the one that needs no introduction, Ko-fucking-Nami, who I have already talked about before, and if you don't remember, here's a short clip.
Konami couldn't even be bothered to take their original Silent Hill franchises and update them and make them HD properly. They thought, oh, you know what people really hate in the old Silent Hill 2? Was fog. Let's remove it. Yeah, that was what it was.
Now, Konami is one of the most interesting case studies, and please don't do this as a video game publisher out there. While Capcom has a history of poor choices that's going back years, Konami has decided really just to look at 2015 and say, just fuck my shit up. Any gamer worth their salt knows about Konami. They currently hold the rights to a ton of great IPs, including but not limited to Contra, Bloody War, Sodakin, Zone of the Enders, Castlevania, Silent Hill, Pro Evolution Soccer, and Metal Gear Solid. However, even though Konami holds all these great IPs, there's an issue. They've either killed, ruined, or bastardized all of them, killing all but 4 in the series. The last real Contra was Hardcore Uprising in 2011, the last Bloody War was in 2003, the last Sodakin was in 2008, and the last Zone of the Enders was in 2003. And that's just the series that got off easy. In 2015, Konami are really mainly known for 4 series outside of Japan: Pro Evolution Soccer, Castlevania, Metal Gear, and Silent Hill. Did you feel that? The little twinge of pain thinking about Silent Hills and what could have been? Don't worry, I'll be talking about it. But let me ask you, what happened to Castlevania? After the series was handed off to Mercury Storm and Kojima Productions, it all but sealed the fate of the franchise. Now, am I saying that Lord of Shadow was a bad game? No, actually, I really enjoyed the first one, but it wasn't Castlevania. It was a God of War knockoff, and other than 2 sequels, one of them on the DS, the other one being a multiplat, Lord of Shadow killed the series. So what about Silent Hill? The first 4 games in the series were developed by a small group called Team Silent within Konami. Team Silent, if you didn't know, consisted of various staff members from different departments within Konami that were about to be let go, but were tasked with creating one more game before they did. As it turned out, that last game was going to create one of the most well-known horror games of all time. And it was so successful that they even created 3 sequels, all of which were loved by fans. Hot damn! For a group of people who were about to be fired, that's pretty impressive, right? So what happened? For a reason that no human on Earth will ever be able to rationalize to me, Konami closed down Team Silent in April of 2005 because they wanted Western developers to work on the games instead. The first attempt at this was Silent Hill Origins on the PS2, which got pretty good reviews. But then, oh boy. Then came Homecoming, a game so bland, so repetitive, so unimaginative that it wasn't even released in Japan. Think about that for a moment. This is a Japanese IP that was canceled in Japan but released to the rest of the world. Then things started to look up again when the Silent Hill Origins devs went on to create Shattered Memories. But once again, like a bad hangover after a night of drinking, we were smacked in the face by Silent Hill Downpour. That was it. That was the moment Konami really decided they didn't give a shit about any of their IPs anymore. There was only 2 more entries in the franchise. Silent Hill Book of Memories, which got negative reviews due to the fact that instead of being a horror game, it was a dungeon crawling RPG, and another entry, which deserves a little more time just to truly admire just how poor it was. For Konami, HD re-releases are pretty normal. They released 3 different HD collections in the last generation. The Metal Gear Solid HD collection from Blue Point, a development team who were actually really good with HD ports and are currently working on the Uncharted Nathan Drake collection with Naughty Dog. The Zone of the Enders HD collection, which was a massive mess, at least on the PlayStation 3, and had to wait nearly a year for a proper patch just to fix some of the game's performance issues. And the last one, the Silent Hill HD collection, also known as let's remove all the things that people liked from Silent Hill and just say fuck it collection. The Silent Hill HD collection ran like garbage and had all the fog removed from the game, and the graphics weren't that much better than the original. The only thing I can honestly think of that I liked was the fact that they redubbed Silent Hill 2, even if I didn't think it was very good. So how can an HD port of old games go so wrong? Especially when we are swimming in a sea of HD collections right now. Well, according to Konami, who had to actually issue a sort of buyback plan for Silent Hill HD collection, they lost all the original code of the first 3 games. Therefore, they were unable to properly port them to 360 and PS3. Now you might be thinking, if I were in charge and we didn't have a way to properly port these games in a way that actually made them function properly and weren't bogged down with bugs, I would definitely not do it anyway just as a cash grab. And dear viewer, this is where you and Konami differ. You have a soul, a moral high ground, and a moral understanding that it is wrong to want to screw over your own consumer base in such a way. Because they released it, apologized for it, canceled the sale of it, and then offered a buyback program for it. So needless to say, Silent Hill was in a dark place for a while, until we saw the PT. We didn't know what the PT was at the time, all we knew is that it was an eerily realistic hallway simulator. But it piqued our interest. In a world where real horror games were fading away, being replaced by cheap jump scares and repetitive gameplay, we were excited to see what the PT had in store for us. All we knew was that Hideo Kojima, the crazed man behind Metal Gear Solid, was to be working with Guillermo del Toro, the director of Hellboy, Pacific Rim, and Pan's Labyrinth, to create this horror game starring Norman Reedus of Walking Dead and Boondock Saints. Everything looked good to us, and we thought, well, if Silent Hill is dead, this might be a good replacement, until we heard the new name, Silent Hills. This was it. A new in-house Japanese developer was going to be working on the Silent Hill franchise. Fantastic! And the response from the media was pretty explosive, with people falling over themselves, shouting about how excited they were for this new game. The demo was downloaded several million times from PSN. People were hyped. So what happened? Well, after it came out that Konami was firing Kojima, we heard that he would stick around as an advisor on Silent Hills, which was fine. But not long after that, Silent Hills was officially canceled by Konami, who went on to promise that they were going to still work on the Silent Hill games in the future. And did anyone really believe that? Well, you shouldn't have, because they went on to announce the new Silent Hill game that would be replacing the much anticipated Silent Hills. It was a pachinko machine. Now, it's not a secret that Konami is heavily involved in Japan's massive pachinko market. It's one of the few ways you can legally gamble away your life there. Pachinko parlors are filled all day, every day, by men and women who are willing to gamble away their money as they chain smoke themselves into an early grave. So it really shouldn't be a surprise that Konami went this route. In fact, after the release of Metal Gear Solid 5 while at TGS, Konami announced that they will be halting all AAA game development, with their only franchise going forward being Pro Evolution Soccer. Instead, they'll be focusing on Japan's large mobile market and pachinko machines, meaning games like Castlevania, Silent Hill, and Metal Gear Solid will begin their full fade into the bin of Konami's wasted IPs. It should be mentioned that Konami is currently looking to hire an entirely new team to work on the new Metal Gear. It's probably going to be a Western team this time around if their track record is anything to go by, which means some of you may actually be excited for it. But why? I'm not going to spoil Metal Gear Solid 5, but I will say this. This game was easily 4 months away from completion at a minimum. It was actually found out through data mining the game's files on PC that there was at least one full chapter that was cut to meet a September 1st release date. So when that was cut, the rest of the game's story needed to be retooled around it, which led to a story being a pile of mush that not even the most die-hard Metal Gear Solid fan can justify. So with Konami forcing Kojima and his staff to slice up their game, firing them, shelving the Fox engine, one of the best game engines on the market, replacing the full team for a new game, while stating that they are no longer in the AAA game business, how can one truly, honestly, want to support a company like this? I don't think it'd be out of the question to say that Konami will be out of the gaming business completely in the next 5 years, and honestly, I would welcome that. Instead of supporting a walking shell of its former self, I don't even know what's going on in the Konami HQ. But over the last few years, they have racked up a lot of sins with me, and I can no longer continue to support them in their future endeavors. So this is it, the final episode of the Sins of Our Publishers main series, and I want to thank you for being patient as I worked on videos and content around this. While the main series may be over, I still plan to come back to tell you about the sins that I see in smaller episodes in the future. If you liked what you saw here, remember to like, favorite, comment, and subscribe, and share it with your friends, and make sure to check out Gamesnosh.com. That's Gamesnosh.com. That's GAMESNOSH.com for all your UK-based gaming news. You guys have a great day.